bunch of ridge runners. Get the lead out. Buona fortuna, amici. Good luck.
Sesi, lass ihn noch ein bisschen rankommen.
In the closing months of 1944, forward units of the American Fifth Army were faced with the task of breaking through these ridges of the German Gothic defense line. On November 26th of that year, a deathly silence settled over this sector of the Italian front, for it was on that day that our third attempt to break the line failed. The story born out of that stalemate is the subject of this film, told from the personal viewpoint of those who were there.
My name is Bill Putnam. I was lieutenant with the 85th.
Ich heiße Georg.
My name is George Weibel. I was a sergeant assigned to a transport unit. I witnessed the end of the war in Italy.
My name is Ben Bush. I was a sergeant with the 86th.
Ich bin Hans-Georg Hildebrand.
I am Hans Georg Hildebrand. I was a German general in northern Italy.
My name is George P. Hayes. I was the commanding general of the 10th Mountain Division.
This is the story of the 10th Mountain Division.
I was certain that words would never be capable of describing what happened here. But time has a way of helping a man put a lot of jagged memories back together again. We were not the first division to come to Italy, nor did we, as one reporter put it, win the war single-handed. I have no doubt that our final story would have been a lot different had it not been for so many other people who had come here before us. We were not responsible for the victories at Anzio, Salerno, or Monte Cassino, or for the march into Rome. We were still in the States in those days. I believe it was Ernie Pyle who called it the Forgotten Front. We became a part of this tragic scenery on December 23rd, 48 hours before Christmas, 1944. We checked into Livorno exactly 1 month and 1 day after the Germans beat back our third attempt to scale their Gothic line. We were given lots of straw to bed down so that we could have insulation from the cold. And it seemed like a wonderful place because the sun was warm. We were well dressed. We were being fed very well. We had lots of time to ourselves. And the idea of the front lines or warfare seemed very far away. We were a peculiar assortment. Our rank and file was made up of Austrian and German Schussboomers, Olympic ski champions, European and American mountain climbers, and what today's generation would probably refer to as Ivy League double domes. Harvard, Dartmouth, and Yale were well represented. An intelligence officer reported that the Germans were not impressed.
On the 8th of January, this first contingent moved north through Florence to face the deadlock at the front. 10 days later, the rest of the division pulled into Livorno.
We had come up from Naples on landing craft and were camped in a park. The whole division was there except for parts of the 86th that were ahead of us and had been in the line. It was raining. Things were rather miserable and soggy, but we were cleaning our equipment, relaxing a bit, getting rested up from the long trip in the ocean.
It was wet, muddy, and The foxholes that they had dug were full of water and very unpleasant. So they were quite anxious, I think, to get on with the show and get something moving.
On February 4th, we were ordered, my platoon plus one rifle platoon from the 3 rifle companies of our battalion, into a make-up company that was supposed to do something. We weren't really sure what we were supposed to do. But we had orders to go up the valley to our left and ascend the ridge that overlooked the town of Piancinatico. We did this. We got up to the top of the ridge in fairly good order, and I put my mortars in position to shell the town of Piancinatico, and we then waited for something to happen.
Gerd, jetzt kommen die Amis von hinten.
It happened. We did some damage to the town of Piancinatico, but it was all done with my mortars, the 60mm mortars of a line company. I remember rather enjoying the performance because we were actually doing something. We felt constructive. I'm sure the Germans had a different attitude, but we could see some Germans in the town, and I did my own observing, calling the shots to create maximum damage. You can't really do a great deal of damage against buildings with 60mm mortars, but I tried. I remember seeing, praying, just hoping I could drop one round down the chimney of the building that I was sure was their headquarters. And we knocked an awful lot of tiles off the roof first, but I finally got one round right smack down that chimney. I felt so good to see the flames and smoke shoot out the windows and the door. It was a glorious feeling. I guess it was really the only satisfying event of the whole day for any of us on that raid. For it was then that someone turned the tables on us. First I thought it was maybe our own artillery, but it was our friends down below lobbing shells all over the stupid ridge. For some of us, it was our first experience under fire. It wasn't very pleasant. Then a funny thing happened. We couldn't get enough of us to move out of the way. I kept wondering why the officer in charge didn't move, but no one budged. But the moment I got hit, everybody cleared out. Why, leading the parade down was the guy in charge of the foolish raid, and I never saw anybody move so fast in all my life as he did getting out of there after the hours that I'd spent urging him to do something.
The end of the first skirmish. Confusion, fear, a wounded man. Just a sample of what life on the line could be like. There may have been more than one man who wished he had stayed in Livorno. A communique from the front read, "The sector immediately south of the German Gothic line was relatively quiet today." Another report simply stated that the Germans had been observed digging in. 6 days later, on the 11th, elements of the 86th Regiment began probing into enemy territory, looking for ways in which the 10th might gain access to some of the heights the Germans held.
No one made much noise about those patrols. There was no mention of them in the press. We lost men on some of these patrols. And you know, a guy that's killed on patrol is just as dead as a guy that's killed in the big push.
Within 3 weeks of their arrival in Livorno, all remaining elements of the 10th that had been limbering up in rear areas began moving up to their pre-assault positions in and around the town of Vidiciatico. They passed men who had already been at the front.
We naturally spoke to them, eager to find out what battle was like, what combat was like, what bullets were like. And I remember how they told us about the horror that they had experienced, how death actually came to many of their comrades, how they narrowly escaped death, how they were wounded and they would never go back under any circumstances.
Here was the situation at the front as General Hayes saw it from his command post.
On my left is Riva Ridge, and on my right is Mount Belvedere. And on the right of Mount Belvedere is Mount Gorgolesco. Between Belvedere and Riva Ridge, that small humpback ridge was also held by the Germans. As you can see, the Germans had observation on all of our front, and it was essential to capture Riva Ridge to prevent them from looking down on our flank and rear when we attacked Mount Belvedere.
The American line runs from here down to this valley and northeast of Rocca Cornetta. We haven't got any reporters yet on their exact whereabouts on the western flank. Now, I've ordered out 2 patrols in strength. They're to capture any American in the 10th Mountain Division sector and return him alive to me, not to the intelligence.
Who's in charge?
Captain Kroner. He's a mountain man himself.
That night, an American patrol also went out.
Hans, hier rüber. Halt die Klappe da hinten und mach das Licht aus.
In the dark, they met. That night, no prisoners were taken. The entire division, more than 13,000 men, continued to move into and around the town of Vitacatico.
After patrolling for a period of a week, we finally found 4 little paths that we could climb. We thought we could climb up the mountain. Now, they'd had to go up single file. One German at the top of the mountain could throw hand grenades down and stop the whole show if we didn't gain surprise. So naturally, under a situation of that kind, the men would be a little nervous. You couldn't expect them to be otherwise.
And there was Mount Belvedere, serenely majestic, covered with landmines, and for the 4th time, the prime objective of the coming assault.
The first impression of Mount Belvedere from in front of Vitacatico was that it was so far, far away and awfully high up. It seemed impossible that we'd ever be able to make that distance and ever be able to capture that mountain.
On the 14th of February, General Hayes told his commander, Major General Willis D. Krittenberger, that he was ready to breach the German line and to spearhead the 5th Army's advance into the Po Valley that lay to the north. He was given the green light. On the 15th of February, General Hayes dictated this order.
The 10th Mountain Division will attack on D-Day to seize, occupy, organize, and defend the Mount Belvedere, Mount Della Torresilla Ridge, and prepare for action to the northeast. D-Day and H hour to be announced.
The Germans were well aware that something was up. but according to their records, there wasn't much they could do about countering our intentions. General Hildebrand was asked about the obvious absence of German aircraft.
Sie fragen mich nach der mangelnden Unterstützung.
You ask about the lack of support by our Air Force. Gentlemen, I can only reply that there were days, well, weeks, when I did not see a single German plane. There were many planes up there, but they were yours, gentlemen, not ours. It was extremely frustrating when a British or an American fighter plane made observations of our positions, and I had no way of going after it.
Some 10th Mountain Division veterans may remember this house. Farmer Giuseppe Lenzi has lived in it all his life. During the tense wait for D-Day that followed the General's combat order, a handful of men of the 86th Mountain Infantry holed up inside Lenzi's house. Giuseppe remembers their arrival and the day they left.
In febbraio del 1945.
In February of 1945, the Americans arrived at the village of Viticiatico, most of them from the 10th Division. Then in one evening of that February, they began their advance on Mount Riva and Mount Belvedere, where they started a great battle.
As Giuseppe and other farmers watched the troops move out, another man helped guide one of our first probes up the sheer cliffs of Riva Ridge. His name, Gino Lanzi.
On the evening of February 19th, 1945, the 10th American Division began the seizure, the occupation of Mount Capalbuso. Slowly, quietly, to surprise the Germans who were sleeping.
There were only 4 places in that ridge that our troops could climb, and then only single file. And it was absolutely essential that they get on top of that ridge before the enemy was alerted.
It was at this point that the division's special talents first came into play. Expert rock climbers of the 1st Battalion of the 86th began climbing the ridge's jagged rocks to a height of 1,500 feet and, without making a sound, fixed ropes for the use of units that were moving up from below.
We flashed some searchlights on the cloud formation up above, and that reflected back just a little bit of light on the hill mountainside, which enabled them to see a little bit of the rock structure that they had to climb.
All ropes were secured by midnight. The entire valley below was still.
Come on, you bunch of ridge runners! Get the lead out!
After 2 hours of combat, there was still no word from the men on top of the ridge. It was reported, however, that the first of several wounded were on their way down. To General Hayes, there were 2 questions. Would mountain climbers prove to be the answer to the Gothic line? And would their special talents plus the strategy of surprise help keep initial casualties down? After midnight, the first indications of success trickled down to the valley below. Company B of the 86th had dislodged all German troops from the top of Rivas Mount Capelbuso. At dawn, a single platoon of Company A reported that it had occupied the northern end of the ridge, Piso di Campopiano.
Das ist Campopiano. Bis morgen früh haben wir die Bande runtergeschmissen. Gehen wir.
German counterattacks came as expected. They were vicious, but were doomed to failure when a young lieutenant in charge of the lonely platoon checked the German thrust by calling for dangerously close artillery support. By morning of the following day, the ridge was ours. The 10th Mountain Division, still considered green, had chopped the key threat out of the Gothic line. Belvedere was next. In the early morning hours, while initial mopping-up operations got underway on Riva Ridge, the 10th let loose with a terrible hail of steel against Gorgolesco and Belvedere. It did not inspire peace of mind in the men who waited below, for the Germans had, after all, overcome that kind of shellacking on 3 previous occasions.
Feindliche Kampfflugzeuge vom Westen im Anflug! Ganz tief!
When it seemed as though the hill had died, the 85th and 87th regiments pushed off for the minefields above them.
Da kommen sie! Lass sie kommen!
We knew the Germans had 2 weapons. They had an 88 and they had the burp gun. Of course, they had a Luger, but that was the kind of thing you got as a souvenir. The burp gun was something you were afraid of. The 88 was something you should be definitely concerned with.
On the morning of the 20th, one whole battalion of the 85th reached the top of Mount Belvedere. But the trick, as they soon discovered, was not just to reach it, but to hold it. As the 87th swung to the northeast to firm up the Belvedere line, evidence of the cost of that action began to show. The Germans rushed the 741st Jaeger Regiment into the line. And the 10th climbed up to meet them. They wept as they crawled, and they screamed, and the Germans who saw them thought they were crazy. And the Germans cried too, some out of pity, some out of fear, and some out of disbelief. By the 22nd, it became obvious to both American and German commanders that the 10th was no ordinary combat outfit, for by that day it had become clear that it would succeed in holding the objectives assigned to it. News of this relentlessly aggressive outfit spread deep into the German lines. Prisoners revealed that their commanders had called it the Elite Mountain Division. German Sergeant Gerd Weibel was in that combat zone.
Ich erinnere mich noch genau
I remember distinctly when I took over a transport unit south of Bologna. I learned that the American Mountain Division pressed upon us. It came as a shock to all of us because we knew very well that this would spell our collapse.
On February 24th, Riva was secure. Belvedere was secure. And all initial objectives to the northwest were also secure. Peace returned to Viticatico. Just an occasional shot could be heard. In a letter of commendation to the division, General Mark W. Clark, commander of the 15th Army Group, said, "My congratulations to the officers and men of the 10th Mountain Division. You men have done a damn fine job." General Hildebrand says,
I respect this unit, for I fought against it. Your men fought back very well, and you did not make it easy for us. But I believe our men did not make it easy for the 10th Mountain Division either. A soldier's fate, a soldier's duty.
Every major victory in war is a result of long planning, long preparation, with the loss of often thousands of men. But when something comes along that is unexpected and you have this great prize, now there's a great elan. In the other cases, you've expected it, you've planned for it. And here, you come along with something that gives a great lift to the morale of the whole force, everybody. I think from private up to our bosses in Washington and London knew that the war was over. Every one of us realized that if Hitler had the slightest sense, he would immediately surrender. But it was the gallantry of the men that did it is something that should never be forgotten. And their names really ought to be in some, I'd say, permanent place in the niche of fame that the American government should like to keep.
The people of Remagen loved their bridge. They loved it because it was an attraction for visitors from all over the countryside. And they loved to stroll across it on Sunday afternoons, to have picnics near the site of it. And they're right proud of the fact that the bridge was a strategic link between the German Ruhr on the north and the Saar-Moselle region on the south. Everybody knew that it would take a long amount of planning to cross the Rhine River, because this was the big natural barrier between the Siegfried Line and the straight shot toward Berlin. So even before we landed in Normandy, the Supreme Headquarters began to lay its strategic plans.
There was considerable argument as to how we should cross the Rhine when we reached the West Bank. The British argued, particularly Marshal Montgomery, that we should cross only in the north and make our attack north of the Ruhr. So that my plan was to cross the First Army just south of the Ruhr, and the Third Army under Patton to cross down somewhere near Koblenz, and then join them together and attack to sweep around the south and east side of the Ruhr and connect up with the 9th U.S. Division, which at that time was under Monty, on the east side of the Ruhr, and then clean up the Ruhr. As a matter of fact, we did do that later and secured something like 368,000 prisoners in the Ruhr.
As the Americans approached Remagen in early March, I had at my disposal, in the bridgehead of Remagen, one sapper company of 125 men. The sappers were assigned to the planking of the railroad bridge in order to make it passable for motor vehicle traffic. The men had to work day and night in order to complete the bridge.
It was very easy to defend Remagen because of the crooked and narrow streets, and particularly the 600-foot-high cliff on the opposite side of the Rhine, which provided wonderful observation for 10 miles around, from which the defender could see anybody approaching the town. By the morning of the 7th of March, along about 11:30, Carl Timmerman saw a great deal of excitement up ahead on the edge of the woods. He gunned his Jeep, went to the edge of the woods, and looked down on the broad Rhine River. And there he saw the electrifying sight of a bridge still standing, the Ludendorf Bridge, a bridge which the Americans never expected to find standing.
Around 10:20 a.m., the entire front line of the American infantry had reached the edge of the Remagen bridgehead. Our bridge defense company opened fire with rifles and machine guns, upon which the American infantry forces retreated, and for the time being, everything remained quiet. About 11:15 a.m., a major in General Staff uniform arrived and introduced himself as Major Schurler. Major Schurler told me that he had orders to take over command at Remagen. At that moment, I breathed a sigh of relief, because I thought, now we will get the promised additional battalions. My first question was, where are the battalions? Major Schurler looked at me in surprise and asked, which battalions? Now it was my turn to look surprised, and I almost suspected that something was not quite in order.
When Timmerman first saw that the Remagen Bridge was still standing, his first reaction was, let's get some artillery down on that, because look at all those German vehicles and troops that are crossing. However, the order came back from higher headquarters, nothing except air bursts would be fired at that bridge, since it's still standing. Timmerman was then ordered by Colonel Engelmann, the task force commander, to make a reconnaissance down into Remagen, which he proceeded to do. The tanks and infantry then attacked the town. The infantry moved, hugging close to the walls of the buildings of the town, cleaned it out within 2 hours.
While the troops were moving into position for the attack on the bridge, we captured a number of soldiers, civilians, and some railroad people in uniform. The rumor came back to me that several of these reported that the bridge was to be blown up at 4 o'clock. I don't think there was any truth in that, but at the time, I informed the task force commander Colonel Engman that he should speed up his attack since the bridge was supposed to be blown at 4 o'clock. It was then about 3:30.
Major Devers, the infantry battalion commander, asked Lieutenant Timmerman, "You think you could get your company across that bridge?" Timmerman said, "Well, we can try." Devers said, "Go ahead." Timmerman asked, "What if the bridge blows up in my face?" The battalion commander didn't answer. He just walked away. In fact, nobody ever answered the question, "What if the bridge blows up in my face?"
A powerful detonation occurred on the left bank of the Rhine, immediately behind the bridge. I did not know how to explain this. Captain Friesenhahn, the bridge commander, had blasted the dike on the other side of the bridge, at the ramp of the bridge, a demolition which had already been envisaged. This was a sign to me that the Americans were approaching.
When the truck came up on the morning of the 7th of March, Brodka and Friesenhahn were horrified to discover that they had gotten just about half as much explosives as they had been promised, and in addition to that, it was an industrial type of explosive known as Donnerit, instead of the military explosive, which was far more powerful.
Captain Friesenhahn was calling from the tunnel entrance. "Captain Brodka! Captain Brodka! Combat commander!" I rushed over to him. Still completely out of breath, he reports to me, "The Americans, they're at the Becher timber mill." This mill was located immediately behind the Rhine. In other words, they had reached the bridge. I told him, "Friesenhahn, blast the bridge, blow it up." I have no permission. Major Schöler is the only one who can give the order for demolition. At that moment, Major Schöler was on the other side of the tunnel, 350 meters away from us, only to be reached on foot. So I dashed off through the dark tunnel to Major Schöler. I reported to him, "The Americans are going to cross the bridge." Major Schöler is very calm. I said, "Major, if you don't give orders to blast the bridge, I will do so." "Then go ahead, have the bridge blasted." I ran back to Captain Friesenhahn. Back again through the dark tunnel. Again, minutes passed before I could reach him. As soon as he could hear me, I called out to him, "Friesenhahn, blow up the bridge!" Friesenhahn shouts, "Full cover, full cover!" Everybody in the tunnel lies down flat on the ground in order to escape the tremendous blast we expected.
As far as we know, we actually saw the bridge lift up off its foundation. There was dust and debris thrown all over, and after a while, you couldn't see the bridge anymore. It wasn't too long. The dust cleared, the bridge was still standing. And Timmerman said, "Okay, move out."
Instinctively, my hand comes to my neck. I know. If the bridge doesn't go down into the water, my life will be at stake. Something has to happen. I rush back to Major Schöler and report to him, "Demolition of the bridge has failed." But I had hardly reached him when someone called again through the tunnel, "Captain Brodka, combat commander up front." It grows louder and louder. Major Schöler says, "Have a look what is going on." Again, I run back through the tunnel, through the masses of civilians, passing men, women, children. Soldiers are amongst them. I reach Friesenhahn. Friesenhahn already shouts, "Americans across the bridge." That was all we needed. Come on, Friesenhahn. A few men from the sapper units. Counterattack. There can't be many of them. We have to throw them back. I've already tried it. We wanted to get out immediately. But look, the tremendous gunfire aimed at the entrance of the tunnel. One grenade after another. You can't subject anybody to that. No one will get out alive.
Friesenhand, there is only one possibility. Escape through the other end of the tunnel, across the dam, a counterattack. The Americans have to retreat. I rush back to Major Schurler. Report to him. Americans are crossing the bridge. Major, you have to prepare for an immediate counterattack. I will get the people out of the tunnel. Do you want to get them out? No, Bradker. You go ahead. I enter the tunnel. Get hold of a sergeant. Summon everyone who still carries arms. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 men. Sergeant Foner. Run along. Get me 9 men. Major Schurler still has 2 lieutenants with him. He should put them into action.
This bridge enabled us to get across the Rhine here without having to make an assault later on. And really made a decision to cross on a wide front easier for Eisenhower to make.
From our position on the west bank of the Rhine, we could see considerable enemy activity across the river in the little town of Erpel. A very pretty little town, but it was set on the side of a mountain or a cliff. It did not lend itself very well to an attack. If we should move into that area, the enemy would have quite an advantage overlooking our position. However, since we were there to cover the crossing of the infantry, we did pick out numerous targets of opportunity, as we call them, and opened fire and fired across the river to assist the infantry in crossing the bridge.
As we started across, the only thing that was in my mind was to get off that bridge. The Germans had attempted once to blow it and had failed. And we felt sure, or I felt sure, that the next time the bridge would go. Therefore, we tried to move as fast as we possibly could. However, the leading elements were being shot at by snipers and other people on the other side, and they were moving more cautiously. Right in front of us, as you get off the bridge, there's the tunnel, the railroad tunnel. Sergeant Krebs and I advanced towards it, and then we each took a hand grenade and threw it into the tunnel. There was a curve in the tunnel, and we got down as far as the curve, and we heard a great many voices talking and yelling and everything else. We couldn't make out how many people or who they were. We didn't know whether it was German soldiers or whether they were German civilians. However, we couldn't take a chance, so we threw a couple more grenades and fired a couple more shots.
Captain Friesenhand and I rushed to the tunnel exit. Quickly grab a few sapples and try for the second time to make an escape from the tunnel. And again the hand grenades roar down from the tunnel. And at a distance of approximately 120 meters in front of us, a machine gun fires right into the tunnel. Suddenly there are screams coming from behind us. We turn around and go back. There are casualties among the civilians. A man, a child. A bullet wound in the stomach, a gunshot in the leg. The civilians are excited. They scream. They cling to the soldiers, grab them and take away their arms. They come to me. Combat commander, order a ceasefire. Stop it. Our women, our children. I too have a wife at home. What shall I do? An order is an order. This is the most difficult hour of my life. I decide to summon the officers. I cannot carry on. I tell them, according to the Führer's orders, if an officer is no longer in a position to continue combat, he will have to pass on command. And whoever takes over will continue combat. And every officer has to take orders from him, down to the lowest rank soldier. Gentlemen, I have an announcement. Which one of you is willing to carry on the battle? I see silence. No one volunteers. Gentlemen, in that case, I'm obliged to pass on the command to the unit. Then I happened to look toward the tunnel exit. Civilians have hoisted the white flag. And they're leaving the tunnel together with the soldiers. It's impossible to go on fighting now. Gentlemen, the white flag has been hoisted without our consent. We are still subject to the regulations of the Geneva Convention. If we continue to fight, we will give the enemy the right to demolish everything. And all these women and children, we will be morally responsible for them. I therefore order a ceasefire. Destroy your weapons, and we will be the last ones to leave the tunnel. Meanwhile, the majority of civilians has left the tunnel, together with the soldiers. We 5 officers who are still in the tunnel, we are now leaving the tunnel too. The last ones to go are Captain Friesenhahn and I. We became prisoners of war of the Americans.
During the afternoon, we spent considerable time in adjusting our guns and making notes where various targets were, so in the event that we had to fire during the night, we would have those targets zeroed in. However, when nighttime came, I was called into a meeting of the officers by our combat commander to be briefed on what our next action would be. I was told at that time that we were going to attempt a crossing of the bridge with our tanks. It was not known if the strength of the bridge was sufficient to hold a tank, but the infantry needed armored support on the other side, and we had to make an effort to get our tanks over there. So we all started across, one close behind the other. As a matter of fact, I was so close to the tank in front of me that several times before the crossing was over, I had bumped Speedy Goodson's tank. I had called ahead to him because it was so dark, asking him to make sure that he did not get too far away from me. And he says, "Lieutenant, I can't very well get far away from you with you bumping me constantly." Except for the indecision or inability to follow this tape across the bridge, we did get across without any incident.
The Americans got 5 tanks and about 120 infantrymen across the Remagen Bridge, a pretty thin force to hold a strategic point like that. But the next morning, all of the American troops within miles around converged on the bridgehead, and within 24 hours, 8,000 American soldiers had crossed the Remagen Bridge.
We established a CP just across from the bridge on the east side, just north of the bridge, about 200 yards. This CP was in what had been the burgomaster's house at Erpel. It was from this command post in the cellar of the burgomaster's house at Erpel that we commanded the development of the initial bridgehead across the Rhine River. Beginning that morning and continuing for a number of days later, there was a constant stream of American troops from the west bank to the east bank of the river.
As soon as we could, we threw 4 divisions across on the east side of the Rhine to form a bridgehead. The Germans countered by throwing 11 German divisions against us to try to push us back or at least contain us. Fortunately for us, those were divisions that had been fighting in the Bulge and the Ardennes and were very much reduced in strength and effectiveness. One of the divisions, for example, they threw against us was the 2nd Panzer Division, which had been badly chewed up and suffered terrific casualties. Another was the 5th Airborne German Division, which had also suffered terrific casualties. So even with 11 divisions thrown against our 4, they were not able to drive us back across the river. In fact, we could expand almost at will against them, and we gave orders to the 1st Division, to the 1st Army, to have those divisions expand, advance about 1,000 yards a day so that they would not be mined in and therefore would be able to break out when the time came.
Hitler threw in everything he had in an effort to destroy the Remagen Bridge. He fired the deadly V2s against the bridge. He mobilized a couple of big 17-centimeter railroad guns to fire in their big charges. Most of all, he thought he could destroy the bridge through underwater swimmers. There was a special group of swimmers that had been trained in Vienna, all under 29 years of age, in perfect physical condition. They went into the water several miles above the bridge and swam underneath water, armed with charges that they were going to put against the bridge. However, they were picked up by real powerful American searchlights mounted on tanks that were sweeping the river during the night. These swimmers never did reach their objective, and they were captured by the Americans a mile or so below the bridge.
With reference to the traffic across the bridge, as you can well understand, there was only the one bridge to start with. Engineers were brought forward immediately and started the construction of ferries and then bridges across the river. Initially, almost all of the traffic was from west to east. The only time we reversed the traffic was to take back the wounded. Later, when ferries were in operation and the ponton bridges came into use, the traffic was both ways and the bridge was closed for repairs.
For a period of about 7 days, my unit, the Combat Engineer Battalion, worked hand in hand with a bridge construction outfit that was more or less in charge of erecting the dismembered pieces of iron and steel that were the upper part of the bridge. Ours was mainly the job of the flooring of the bridge. This was a railroad bridge, by the way. And we worked feverishly around the clock, 24 hours a day in different shifts, to build a Bailey Bridge, to get treadway on the bridge so that we could give the boys some support or get some equipment to them that were fighting so hard on the other side of the river. During this time, there was constantly periods where enemy aircraft was coming in, strafing the bridge, dropping bombs, trying to knock this bridge out. There was artillery fire. We stopped periodically to get under cover for these. One time I remember, rather stupid of me, enemy aircraft came over, and as it did, I tried to find something to hide under, and it was the Bailey Bridge that we were constructing. And after the strafing was over, I realized that this is probably the worst place that I could have been, because if that bridge had been hit, I'd have been caught or trapped underneath there. But these are the things that you remember afterwards, at any rate. This was a constant turmoil. It was men racing against time, that we needed help for those fellows over there, and we were working real hard, equipment flying all over the place. Lieutenant Enos and I were down at the bridgehead, or at the western bank, and we were discussing a few little details, and he was pulling some of his men off, and I was just getting ready to send mine up, when suddenly we heard something like rifle fire, and we looked up in the air as if to look for aircraft, but instead there was dust coming up, rising from the bridge, and it seemed to totter a little, and it seemed to sway toward us, and then the center section of the bridge started to cave in. We had
trucks up on the bridge that part of it was on the center section and part on the abutment side, so that this truck, I can remember, just folded up like an envelope. Pieces of equipment and pieces of the bridge were tumbling down. And I think our first reaction was to take cover that either the bridge had been hit or for some reason that it was going to fall. And then just as rapidly as you can well imagine, that whole big structure disappeared in front of us. And now we're all running to see what we can do about fishing people out of the river. That it was almost a bubbling, roaring noise that it almost seemed like the river itself had been turned into a boiling pot with all this debris falling in it, and men screaming, and you could see fellows were hurt and grasping for something to hang on to and going down the river where eventually they were picked up. But ours was a case of real turmoil then.
Lots of reasons contributed to the collapse of the Ludendorf Bridge on the 17th of March. In the first place, the German demolition on the 7th of March had really shattered one side of the bridge and weakened it seriously. Then when the Americans put planking on the bridge to cover it over and cover over the holes which had been blown in the bridge, this added about 50 tons of weight to the bridge. There was a great deal of heavy pounding from the tanks and the vehicles that crossed. The German artillery shells tore a lot of additional holes in the bridge. Then there were the bombs that the Luftwaffe dropped on the bridge itself. One of the real reasons, I think, in addition to this, that contributed to the collapse was the amount of heavy equipment that the engineers moved onto the bridge. Cranes, electric arc welders, air compressors, all these things set up vibrations. The American artillery batteries, particularly anti-aircraft batteries, that set up vibrations that caused all the ground to shake around the bridge. I don't think that you could say that any single one of these factors caused the collapse of the bridge, but the combination of them caused the structure just to weaken and die on the 17th of March.
So much has been said and written about Remagen. It was said that the bridge fell into the hands of the Americans through treason, sabotage, and cowardice. I guarantee that what I told you is true. Neither sabotage nor treason were involved. The bridge was lost to the Americans. The officers tried, and the German soldiers tried, up to the very last moment, to do their duty.
Captain Karl Friesenhahn, when I interviewed him right after the war, asked what awards the first Americans had received for crossing the bridge. And when I told him they had received Distinguished Service Crosses, he responded, they deserved them and then some. They saw us trying to blow up that bridge, and by all odds, it should have been blown up while they were crossing it. In my mind, they were the greatest heroes in the whole war.
Hitler had a vast and extensive technical military knowledge, but he was a fanatic, and fanatics are known for their disability to keep a cool head and weigh their thoughts carefully. This, however, is an absolute necessity for the strategist. At the same time, Hitler was not inclined to consider the enemy capable of accurate and fast action. He was and remained a military dilettante.
Das ist aber Voraussetzung für den Strategen. Ebenso war nicht geneigt, dem Gegner und schnelles Handeln zuzugeben. Daran ist gescheitert. War und blieb ein militärischer Dilettant.
The cost to Germany of Hitler's miscalculations would be staggering. More than 250,000 men dead, wounded, or captured. At least 1,400 tanks and guns destroyed or abandoned. Slowly and painfully, the remnants of the once proud Wehrmacht retreated behind their shattered western defenses. It was the beginning of the end. By the 3rd of February, the 84th Division had again moved back to their positions on the Siegfried Line. Their watery objectives lay before them: the Ruhr, the Rhine, and the Elbe.
The Ruhr River crossing was one of the most thoroughly rehearsed river crossings of any unit in the European theater. The original crossing date was to be 10 February, but it was postponed because the Germans had flooded the area. So we then had about 2 more weeks in which to work out all the details very thoroughly and to rehearse all the units for the overall operation.
It's amazing that we ever got across the Ruhr River, considering the confusion that takes place during the preparations for the attack. If you can imagine us being pitch dark, with a narrow road, with huge trucks, with fountains for the assault bridges to come later along one side of the road, and a very narrow strip available to move up troops through. When you consider the horrible noise of the artillery preparation, which lasted for 45 minutes prior to our crossing, during which time commands can't be heard, and it's very difficult to give any orders and expect them to be carried out.
The Germans had constructed a rather wide band of wire, barbed wire, on the far side of the Ruhr River and studded it with S-mines, which bounced up in the air when triggered off about 6 feet and exploded there, making it impossible for anybody to avoid the fragment. This minefield and barbed wire on the far side of the river made the Ruhr River one of the biggest little rivers in the world as far as I was concerned.
Before that day was over, we had 2 full infantry regiments across. The Germans were caught off balance. They did counterattack us at the town of Ball, but they were unable to organize themselves fast enough. And after 3 days, our position on the other side of the river was secure. It was General Bolling's impression at that time that the German soldier was no longer the same soldier whom we had faced earlier. The point now was to break through all of the resistance and give the enemy no time to catch his breath or to recover even for a moment. The final phase of the war began for us on April the 1st when we crossed the Rhine. Everything that we had was on wheels, and they were all turning.
We rolled across the northern part of Germany on autobahns for the most part, at great speeds and long convoys. This was exciting because we were covering so much ground compared to what it had been like on the Siegfried Line earlier. And we rarely had to get out of the trucks except when we'd run into a rash of firing, then we'd have to jump out and run for cover, and then after a while the whatever difficulty would be taken care of, and then we'd roll on again. If combat can be described as fun, this was, because the weather was fine and we were rolling and we were going through a part of Germany which had not been much shot up. And we saw civilians for the first time, German civilians, and we were able to shout at Fräuleins and do all the things soldiers like to do.
Allied morale was high, for each man of the 84th knew that the war was near its end. During the more and more frequent lulls in fighting, there was time for a little relaxing, time even for the humorous anecdote.
Army rations were pretty good, but one day after too many servings of corned beef, we spotted a half-starved German chicken. One of the men went out gutting for it. He was using an M1 rifle, but he had armor-piercing bullets in it. The soup we made that night, we had to strain the bones through our teeth.
By the end of April, A Company had reached the Elbe River. And this started a short but rather strange life for the men in the unit. The Germans had naturally withdrawn across the river to the other side, and they permitted us, strangely enough, to enjoy a degree of freedom during the daylight hours. We actually could go out into the river and fish, near our banks, of course. But at nighttime, any movement along the river whatsoever drew fire. At that particular time, there was a degree of mixed emotions among the men in the company. There was that particular feeling in which they wanted to go on and be the first unit into Berlin, which had been the division objective ever since they landed in Europe. And at the same time, the soldiers, I don't believe, wanted to have the honor of being the last man, the last casualty in the war. And I must admit, the Elbe looked very wide at that time. After just a few days, really, on the Elbe, we awoke one morning and discovered, much to the amazement of everybody, that the far bank was virtually covered with tens of thousands of German soldiers, desperately trying to get across to our side. It was quite apparent that there was no effort, that this wasn't an attack, and as a result, there was no effort on our part to prevent this crossing. They were trying to get across on rafts that they had made during the night, and on boats, on inner tubes, any way they could get across, and they were quite successful. And this, of course, was the day when our battalion, and I guess the division, captured the largest number of prisoners. The war wasn't over, but the Germans had decided that they were going to surrender to us rather than to the Russians.
One of the lasting memories for me of this last action was when General Bowling and I crossed the very swift Elbe River to meet the oncoming Russians. This was on the 26th of April. On the far bank of the river were at least 10,000 German soldiers who had not yet been taken prisoner. Some were wounded, others were sick, and all were thoroughly demoralized. The very sight, though, of so many men trapped there on the other side of the river symbolized for me the total collapse of the German army and the absolute conclusion of hostilities.
When we finally encountered the Russians on the opposite bank of the Elbe, they appeared to be a rather motley, disorganized crew with all kinds of transportation, including horse-drawn wagons, ambulances, motorcycles, bicycles, and even a few riding bareback plow horses. They were a very friendly, boisterous lot who seemed extremely happy to meet up with the Americans and finally realize that the war was at an end.
For those who met at the Elbe on that April day in 1945, the war had reached its inevitable conclusion. For the men of the 84th Infantry Division, There was the knowledge that from the Ruhr to the Rhine, and from the Rhine to the Elbe, they had accomplished every mission. They had been tried by fire, and they had won.
As the last traces of the snows of '44 vanished from the Italian soil, the 10th Mountain Division prepared to move north to break through the rest of the German Apennine defense line. One of its immediate objectives was the once quiet town of Casteldaiano. Innkeeper Angelo Maldini lives there today.
The story of the 10th American Mountain Division in Casteldaiano, it began on March the 3rd, 1945. There are many people at Casteldaiano who remember that day. The American 10th Mountain Division could be seen coming through the valley. They had two objectives. Looking south on the right, the town of Casteldaiano, and on the left, Monte della Spring. The Germans were well entrenched. They were ready for them.
We had 8 months of front lines. In those 8 months, they tore down all the houses at Casteldaiano. There wasn't one covered. There were also some dead. And then the Germans took from the houses all they could take. But when the Americans arrived, they gave us things to eat. And, well, we lived a little better.
Casteldaiano, once again, was secure and was given back to its own people. 3 days after the battle started, Monte della Spring was also secure. Some never knew the name of the place. They were left behind in the stillness that enveloped that mountain town.
It was a bloody battle. The people here were glad when it was over. But the sadness that all wars bring can still be felt in these hills.
The division paused to wait for its supply lines to catch up, and the men prepared for the next offensive. During this relative respite from battle, routine patrolling continued. This is what some men saw from their positions. Veterans of the campaign will remember that distant peak as the Rocca Rufino, and the lump to its left as the ridge of Mount Pigna. Held by the Germans, it marked the last major defense of their once touted Gothic line. Mount Pigna, too sheer to climb, would have to be captured at night from behind. This was done in a matter of hours. Rufino would have to be taken head-on by day.
Rocca Rufino's attack began very early in the morning at dawn. And we were starting from a high ridge, looking down a valley. We weren't to start until after all the preparations had been readied, so that we had a beautiful view in a beautiful day, bathed in sunlight, of the valley, the mountain, and everything around it. This was in the spring, and we were waiting for the beginning of the air attack. Before long, the planes came overhead, and it was a pleasure to see them diving down toward the mountain. And as they screamed down the mountain and turned on their way up, you'd see a release of flame that would reach almost to the sky. A napalm bomb released. The fire lasts a long time because of the jelly that spreads along the mountains. And the rate of burning seemed to be terrific. Everything seemed to be in flame. And as plane after plane peeled down, let go its bomb, and more flame reached up in the sky, it seemed as if nothing that was alive could ever survive that fire.
And when everything had been finished and everything had been done, and there seemed nothing more for us to do than just walk over. Just walk over leisurely and take the ground, and it was ours. Then everything came right back at us. Everything and more.
Once again, silence surrounded the valley as the 10th moved out. And the Germans watched them come. And they wondered how this elite division would ever cross this open terrain and climb to this incredible height.
20 Meter zu kurz. 20 Meter zu kurz, Herr Hauptmann. Zu weit. 10 Meter zurück und feuern. Und noch 5 zurück. Und nochmal. Und nochmal.
Few people will remember the name of this mountain hamlet below the Rocca Rufino. But it's where a number of Americans discovered that there were a number of Germans who were unwilling to throw in the towel. Further resistance ended when General Hayes sent a fresh battalion in from behind and surrounded the town. The 10th now fixed eyes on the ridges above and moved in to tackle the Rocca Rufino.
Wir müssen Granatwerfer anfordern. Mensch, die kommen unter unserer Feuerlinie durch. Ich kann nicht anrufen. Unsere Leitungen sind alle abgeschnitten.
A German corporal remembers what happened next. His name, Horst Kugelmeier.
Unten im Tal sperrte uns ein heftiges Artilleriefeuer den Rückzug ab.
Down in the valley, there was heavy artillery fire, which made it impossible for us to retreat. And in front of us, there were the Americans. We gave in to what was inevitable, threw our weapons away, walked toward the Americans, raised our hands, and did exactly as the pamphlets had told us to do, to surrender. We expected hostile reactions, but, well, one becomes a prisoner of war only once in life. The Americans searched us for weapons, ordered us to sit down, and suddenly, it was rather funny at the moment, there came an American sergeant, and he asked in German where we came from. We said, we are from Munich, and he remarked that he knew Straubing. They offered us cigarettes, and suddenly, all of us were sitting together, Americans and Germans next to each other, and we smoked cigarettes. Our canteen went around. We still had some cognac in it, and I had the feeling that suddenly there was peace.
By nightfall, the Rocca Rufino was secure, but the Germans continued to harass the new arrivals with accurate mortar fire. And so, for some people, the battle ended on a different note. The 10th Mountain Division had finally cleared the last obstacle in its drive to capture the Po Valley below. The Germans, tossed off the Apennines for good, began rolling north in the hope of slowing the Allied advance at 2 river crossings. The first at Pamporto, the other farther north at the town of San Benedetto. It was no secret that the Germans would try to destroy all the bridges. The 10th would attempt to prevent this from happening. Brigadier General Robinson Duff, second in command, was assigned to this mission.
I gave Robbie Duff a battalion of infantry, mounted in trucks, some light tanks and reconnaissance units and told him to bypass any resistance he ran into and move as rapidly as he could down to the Bomporto bridges and capture them intact. I told him never mind the Germans that he ran into, to go around them, that the rest of the division would come along behind and mop them up.
Miraculously, the Germans were outrun. The bridge at Bomporto was captured intact. The rest of the division, racing up from behind, overran so many Germans that for a moment it looked as though the advance might be stopped by the simple burden of figuring out what to do with so many prisoners. General Hayes solved the problem by stationing MPs 10 miles apart. The MPs then waved these war-weary men into hastily erected enclosures. Farther north, however, there were still German units determined to make a last-ditch stand. General Hayes remembers that it was in this action that he lost his second in command.
It was then about 9 o'clock at night. After we got straightened out and started again toward the Po, Robbie Duff saw a mine lying in the middle of the road, and he ran over to the tank that was advancing on this mine and rapped on the door, trying to tell them to stop and not run over the mine. Unfortunately, they ran over the mine just as he got to it, and that wounded him.
Just a few miles away, the Germans were making a desperate attempt to get to the other side of the Po. Their retreat was costly. Private Franz Hubel was there.
Die Verwundeten mussten wir zurücklassen.
We had to leave the wounded behind, and only those who found some means or material could save their lives. We crossed the Po on trees, trunks, on telephone poles, car tires, and whatever else we had at our disposal. The physical and mental efficiency of the German soldiers at that time was at its lowest point, and everyone hoped that the war would soon be over.
Hatte die Hoffnung, dass der Krieg bald zu Ende gehen wird.
General Hildebrand remembers it this way.
Es fehlt an allem. Ammunition.
There was a shortage of everything. Of ammunition, of gasoline, of reinforcements, of tanks, and above all, aircraft. Nevertheless, gentlemen, a demoralization of the troops did not occur. Our men at the front did their duty to the bitter end.
That night, the 10th arrived at the Po.
Well, the next morning, I went down and looked at the Po, across the Po with my field glasses, and I could see that the dike on the other side was all prepared for defense. They had foxholes were vetted in the... And as far as I could see, there were no infantry over there. And I thought, well, we'd better get across before the German infantry come and man those defenses. So I planned the crossing with the 87th Infantry making the initial crossing at high noon.
It was warm and sunny, I believe, although we didn't much care about the scenery or the type of day. We had to cross up over the dike, and things were rather uncomfortable because the Germans had some anti-aircraft batteries on the north side of the river, a few miles upstream, and they were shelling us all the way across with time bursts which exploded right over us as we were in the field next to the river and as we were crossing. Once we got across the river, we could spread out and escape from this murderous type of artillery. So we did.
At the same time, Bill Putnam remembers taking note of a sad realization.
It was the day we crossed the Po River. Ahead of me in the crossing had been Company L of the 87th. I spent the happiest, perhaps, days of my Army life in that company as a private, and I knew all the people in that company. When we crossed the Po, they'd stopped ahead of us, and my company crossed through theirs. And I only recognized two people.
Beyond the Po, the 10th Mountain Division got fresh supplies, captured the town of Verona, and a few hours later lost its assistant division commander, Colonel William O. Darby, to a German shell. He received the rank of Brigadier General after his death. The 10th rolled north to Lake Garda and took to the water to capture the tunnels on both sides of the lake. And it left friends behind as the fading war claimed its very last victims. It fought for the town of Torboli and silenced resistance on the northern shore. It battered the Germans out of their last mountain stronghold. It cleared the Adige line and then held the Germans at bay.
Mein lieber Sohn, es sieht so aus, my dear son,
als ob es nicht mehr lange dauern würde,
it appears
in diesen mörderischen
that it won't
Bergen.
last much longer in these
Dir nicht
murderous
zu sehr
hills.
zu Herzen, wenn ich dir sage,
Don't be sorry
dass wir verloren haben.
when I say we have lost,
Denn das ist die bittere
for
Wahrheit.
that is the bitter
Wir haben
fact.
nicht die geringste Hoffnung mehr,
We no longer have
diese
any hope
unglaubliche Wendung
of
der
stopping this
Ereignisse
incredible
aufzuhalten.
turn of events.
Ich schreibe dir,
I write this to you
weil ich dir
certain
nicht
that no censor would be so foolish
dass
as to disagree with these words at this late hour.
We took the town of Riva. The war was over.
When you soldiers go home, no one will believe you when you start telling of the spectacular things you have done. There have been more heroic deeds and experiences crammed into these days than I have heard of. I have been privileged to participate in many actions that were considered important and fierce battles. And I can assure you that one of the most bitter were the ones that we fought right here. Many times, we stuck our neck out with exposed flanks. At one time, we were 20 miles in advance with both our flanks exposed. The Lord held us by the hand.
And then bells pealed in 1,000 towns, and for a moment time stood still as the world readjusted. And then it was no more than a memory of gunfire and mountains, and of those who had died between Belvedere and Lago di Garda.
Their memory will ever be with us. Those who for a year or more, for a few months perhaps, were our friends, our comrades. And we feel that we have thy divine approval when we say that we are proud to be with them, members of the same unit, the same army, the same commonwealth. And as we stand this day in the final moments of remembrance, under the same sun and same sky under which our comrades worked and prayed and fought and played so well, we pray to thee, our sovereign God, that under the same sun and sky they may find repose, rest everlasting, and life eternal, a soldier's Valhalla, their reward. May they rest in peace.
is a battlefront. A battlefront like no other in the long history of mankind's wars. This is an air front. The working day begins, as it will end, with the ground crews, as much a part of the fortress as her wings. If you're a mechanic, you've got your own bomber. You get attached to it. But you know when your ship goes out on a mission, you may never see it again. So you do your work as well as it can be done, perfectly. Because you wouldn't want anything to go wrong that would be your fault. Today, the bombs will be taken from these bomb dumps somewhere in England and delivered to specific points in Wilhelmshaven, Germany. To deliver them is the job of the 8th Bomber Command, just a hauling job, yet one of the most difficult and complicated of military operations. General purpose demolition bombs, impact velocity as high as 750 miles an hour, pierce 5 inches of armor plate, destroy a factory. Briefing at 0800. Pilots, bombardiers, and navigators take their places. The group commander, Colonel Stanley Ray, steps up to the target map, and for the first time, you learn where you're going. Sometimes your face turns white when you find out. Sometimes the feeling you won't come back tightens your insides. Not so long ago, you were sitting like this in a college or high school classroom, not listening too hard, perhaps even a little sleepy. But you listen here. And as you listen, you don't have time to think of yourself. Fear fades. You concentrate on the mission. Type of formation, assembly point, 0 hour, route to target, weather, enemy fighters, enemy flak, route back home. If forced down in enemy territory, destroy equipment. If taken prisoner, give no information. Name, rank, and serial number. That's all. These are the passengers with one-way tickets. And this is the crew of the Memphis Belle, 324th Squadron, 91st Heavy Bombardment Group. Just one plane and one crew in one squadron, in one group, of one wing, of one Air Force, out of 15 United States Army Air Forces. Well, fellas, we've never had an easy ride over there yet. And today won't be any different. No escort except unfriendly. So keep your eyes peeled. Don't get excited and yell when you're talking on the intercom. Save your ammunition and make your shots count. And let me know what goes on back there, Quinlan. Yes, sir. Stay on the ball, gang, and she'll bring us back like she's always done. Okay? Let's go. They have completed 24 missions in this, the toughest theater of air war, the big league of sky fighting. Their experience is priceless. And so, if the Memphis Belle comes back this afternoon, they will be sent to bring the vital lessons they have learned to thousands of aircrew men in training at home. Home is America. This is a battlefront, like no other in this or any war. No monster armies, no booming cannon. Only the roaring engine sound of the bombers pounding through the quiet English countryside. This is an air front. Of the Memphis Belle leave the soil of England for the 25th time. The friendly soil of England, with its ordered farms and rural hamlets, its country estates surrounded by formal gardens and well-kept parks. The England these Americans knew only from the classics they had to read in school. The England of the towns and cities, whose people have defended their island's freedom for over 1,000 years. But today, their countryside has changed. Today, their island has been converted into a gigantic bomber field, a super aircraft carrier anchored off the shores of fortress Europe, with hangars and machine shops, with hundreds of dispersal points, perimeter tracks, and concrete runways. This is England in its 5th year of war. And this is the new battlefront, the air front, from which we seek out the enemy. Not his infantry or his artillery, not his panzer divisions, but the greater menace, the industrial heart of his nation, the foundation on which the Nazi Empire and its armies stand, the power behind the German lust for conquest. The steel mills and refineries, shipyards and submarine pens, factories and munitions plants, pinpoints on the map of Europe which mean rubber, guns, ball bearings, shells, engines, planes, tanks, targets. Targets to be destroyed. And these are the destroyers, each with a belly full of bombs, and 10 men like the crew of the Memphis Belle. Pilot Captain Robert Morgan, industrial engineer from Asheville, North Carolina. He's flown this ship across the Atlantic. The other pilot, Captain Jim Verinis, business administration student at the University of Connecticut. Radio operator and gunner, Sergeant Bob Hansen, construction worker from Spokane, Washington. Navigator, Captain Chuck Layton, chemistry student at Ohio Wesleyan. Engineer and top turret gunner, Sergeant Harold Locke from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Used to be a stevedore. Besides keeping the Belle in order, he covers the sky above. Tail gunner, Sergeant John Quinlan of Yonkers, New York. Clerked for a carpet company, but he quit December 8, 1941. Ball turret gunner, Sergeant Cecil Scott. Firstman for a rubber company in Rahway, New Jersey. Pilot to crew, 10,000, put on oxygen. They're climbing higher now, 300 feet a minute. The strain on the planes and on the men is mounting. The rest of the crew, Bombardier Captain Vincent Evans, operated a fleet of trucks in Fort Worth, Texas. Waist gunners, on the right, Sergeant Bill Winchell, chemist for a paint company in Chicago. And on the left, Sergeant Tony Nastal, used to repair washing machines in Detroit when he was a kid. Now he's 19 and has 2 Nazi fighters, confirmed. It takes all of a pilot's strength to keep a 30-ton fortress in tight formation. But the formation is the bomber's best defense against enemy fighters. The planes are deployed to uncover every gun, stepped up and down, echelon to the right and left, arranged to overcome the danger of gunners firing into friendly ships, arranged so concentrated cones of fire from the caliber 50 machine guns cover the sky for 1,000 yards in every direction. The friendly coast of England slips by below. It doesn't look like much now, but in a few hours when you come back, if you come back, this will be the most beautiful view in the world. Higher and higher, climbing to reach your best operational altitude, 25,000 feet, 5 miles straight up. So high you can't be seen from the ground with the naked eye. So high that after 1 minute without oxygen, you lose consciousness. After 20 minutes, you're dead. From now to the target, you go about your routine duties, plot your course, check your equipment, and wait, and think. Higher and colder. Temperature, 40 degrees, below zero. Take off your glove and you lose some fingers. You look out at the strange world beyond, reflections in plexiglass, like nothing you ever saw before, outside of a dream. Higher and higher into the lifeless stratosphere, until the exhaust of the engines mixing with the cold, thin air condenses and streams the heavens with vapor trails. Ships, they're far from beautiful, for they point like beckoning fingers to the formation, signposts in the sky for the enemy to spot us. For these bombers to accomplish their mission, a plan is needed. Carefully worked out, timed to the minute. The job is to bomb Wilhelmshaven effectively and economically. The enemy is strong, skillful, determined to stop us. Here are his defenses. Airdromes, well dispersed. Each plane indicates a stoffel or squadron of fighters. Heavy anti-aircraft, highly trained and accurate, all along the coast and defending his vital installations. Radar to warn him of our coming. Here is our plan to divide his defenses and weaken his opposition. At 13:30 hours, shortly after takeoff, 6 groups of planes will be heading toward the enemy coast from 6 directions. The Blue Force, 100 B-24 Liberator 4-engine bombers. The White Force, 300 B-17 Flying Fortresses. The Green Force, 300 B-17s with an escort of 6 squadrons of P-47 Thunderbolts. A force of B-26 Marauders, twin-engine medium bombers with 6 squadrons of RAF Spitfires escorting, almost 1,000 planes and over 8,000 men in the air. The enemy alerts all his aerodromes. But which is our main force? What are our targets? Where should the Nazi controllers send their fighters? It's our job to make them guess and guess wrong. A half hour later, at 1400 hours, the Blue Force will be heading east across the North Sea with the White Force following. These enemy fighters are tied down, waiting to meet them, and will not be able to attack the Green Force. These fighters must come up to attack the Green Force, and thus will be no threat to the Blue and White Forces. The B-26s and Spitfires will bomb and strafe a key rail junction, diverting these 6 Stockholm and preventing the enemy from concentrating too many fighters on the Green Force, which is scheduled to bomb an aircraft factory at Hanover. At 1430 hours, the Blue Force will threaten this entire coastal area of northwestern Germany. Which target will it be? Flensburg? The Kiel Canal? Or will it turn suddenly and bomb Hamburg, Wegesack, or Emden? Actually, it carries no bombs at all. It's a decoy and keeps the fighters from the northern area busy while the White Force, the main effort, heads for the submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven. At 1500 hours, while the White Force is over its target, only a fraction of the available German fighter strength of the area can intercept it. Because of the Blue Force diversion and the simultaneous bombing of Hanover by the Green Force. This is the plan of battle for today, drawn up by the Combined Operations Planning Committee and approved by the Commanding General. The White Force, lead group, low squadron. We've crossed the invisible line of enemy radar. The Hun is expecting us. Steel helmets go on. Watchful eyes strain. Tight formations are held tighter still. Tense gunners more alert because here it comes. The enemy coast. From up here, it looks the same as any other. Houses, roads, green fields, factories, waterways. But they are the houses and fields of those who invade and oppress. They are the factories and roads of the people who twice in one generation have flooded the world with suffering. Suffering in such quantity as the history of the human race has never known. Brought torment and anguish into countless American homes. Gold stars and telegrams from the War Department. The first plaque, just harmless-looking, silent puffs of smoke. Only each puff is a shell exploding, throwing shrapnel around the sky. Exactly the range, accurate flak by radio prediction. 5 miles down, Nazi anti-aircraft batteries have calculated the altitude, speed, and course. Where will the next one hit? You try not to be there. The docks and submarine pens of Wilhelmshaven. Approach to the target starts. No smoke screen can protect it. Now the enemy knows the path of your approach and walls that path with a flak barrage, but you fly right through it. Flak so thick you can get out and walk on it. Morgan changes course every 15 seconds. Evasive action to confuse the flak batteries. Bomb sights set for correct altitude and speed. Bomb bay doors open. The bombing run begins. Pilot to bombardier. Okay, Vin, you've got it. Now Evans flies the Memphis Belle, controlling it through the bomb sight. And now we are most vulnerable. Committed to our bombing run, we can't dodge flak or fighters. Here's the first. Top turret fires at him. Evans must ignore the blow. Crosshairs lined up on target. Adjustments for wind drift made. 2 more fighters diving from 9 o'clock. Flak now has the range too. They've hit this fort, but he keeps on his bombing run. As lead bombardier, Evans's aim must be good. Every other ship in the group will drop its bomb when he drops his. Now, one pointer on the bomb site moves toward another stationary pointer. The instant they touch, bombs will release. They touch. Bombs away. The first half of the mission is over, the easy half. Now to get home. The flak stops. That means fighters out there somewhere. A staffer lurking behind that cloud, or hiding up in the sun where the glare blinds you, and you can't see them, waiting to dive down on you. Fighters at 6 o'clock. This is what a gunner sees. A speck in the sky. That's a fighter. And then a blink. That means he's firing at you. 2,300 rounds a minute. In a running battle, one of the most important instruments is the interphone.
There's 4 of them. 1 o'clock high.
They're coming around. Watch.
Fighters, 6 o'clock up, coming in, diving out, Chief.
B-17 in trouble out at 2 o'clock, watching.
Got an engine on fire. There's 2 more diving through the 94th.
3 planes, 9 o'clock, coming around. Keep your eye on them, boys.
Coming around to 10.
Watch them, son. Keep your eyes open.
Yeah. They're breaking at 11, breaking at 11.
I got them.
Coming around underneath at 10 o'clock.
I see them. 2 at 2 o'clock.
Watch them, Scotty.
I got sights on them.
Check that B-17, Chuck. 3 o'clock. Motor's smoking. Fighters 10:30 coming around.
Those 10:30 upper or lower?
B-17 out of control at 3 o'clock.
Come on, you guys. Get out of that plane. Bail out.
There's one. He come out of the bomb bay.
Yeah, I see him.
There's a tail gunner coming out.
Watch out for fighters. Keep your eye on them, Bill.
See any parachutes, Quinlan?
2 parachutes open. Flag at 9 o'clock.
8 men still in that B-17.
Come on, the rest of you guys.
Get out of there.
Come on, Bill.
It's on fire.
There's 3 more shoots.
Flak, 11 o'clock.
Fighters, 6 o'clock.
ME-109 at 3 o'clock.
Keep after him, Mitchell.
I see him. I'm on him. Come on, you son of a bitch. I got him.
Quinlan, confirm that fighter.
got him, Chief. Look, he's bailing out.
Damn it, don't yell on that intercom. Fighters, 10 o'clock.
Watch those 2 and 12, Ben. They're coming in.
They're coming in, Scotty.
Get that ball turret on him.
Save the ammunition as much as possible.
Watch that fighter coming in at 3 o'clock.
He's coming in a half roll. Pull her up, Chief. Pull her up. Hurry.
This fortress is hurt. Engine on fire, losing airspeed and altitude. Drifting into the flak, alone and helpless. A straggler. In a minute, Nazi fighters will swarm in like buzzards for the kill. You can watch, but you can't go down to help. You keep your formation.
Here, too, the mission is being flown. None the less real for being in the minds and hearts of these men behind. Ask anybody who's been to a field in England or anywhere else our bombers are based, and he'll tell you that there's drama here, too. Waiting to see who's coming back. To watch them, you might not realize how tense these ground crews are. But they are tense, and plenty worried. In Air Force talk, this waiting is known as sweating out the mission. These men know the flight plan. Their watches told them when the bombers were running into enemy flak, when they were over the target, when they left the enemy coast. And now their watches tell them the bombers should be nearing the field. Every ear strains for the first sound of the engines. And then somebody hears them. And somebody sees the first faint specks in the distant sky. Every face turns to see and count. The watchers try to read the numbers on the ships. These planes have priority to land first. The colored flares mean wounded aboard. In the hospital window, these watching men know what that means. They know what it feels like to lie on a bouncing fortress floor for hundreds of miles through the frozen stratosphere in great pain, with the other men in your crew fighting to keep you alive until they hit the field. The field. Home. It'll be okay then, because there'll be medical care. The best, as soon as the wheels of your plane stop rolling. Head wound. Concussion. 20-millimeter cannon shell exploded in his radio compartment. Shock. Internal injuries. He'll be all right, though. Flak burst scattered flying shrapnel. He's full of steel splinters. This pilot's leg is not a pretty sight. Neither are the docks at Wilhelmshaven. These men will all get the Purple Heart. And this man, too, posthumously. A transfusion right in the plane. This gunner's too weak to be moved. The new life-giving blood flowing into his veins might be the blood of a high school girl in Des Moines, a miner in Alabama, a movie star in Hollywood, or it might be your blood. Whosever it is, thanks. 36 planes left this field this morning. Now 6 more arrive. That makes 20 home. And this one's 21. More wounded aboard. .22, coming in with his left inboard engine dead. .23, with a feathered prop on his left outboard engine. .24, Southern Comfort, with a chunk of tail gone. .25, they flew home on their luck. 26. Not a scratch. The control tower learns that 2 more landed at a British field to the south. 1 a crash landing, crew safe. That makes 28. 29. A rough landing, but her pilot's badly hurt. It's a wonder he brought her back at all. Here's old Belle. A pretty good airplane when it took off. Lost its nose, lost its navigator, bombardier wounded, top turret gunner and pilot hit. Hydraulic system shot out, no brakes, no flaps. But old Belle came back. Now, among the returned crew members, talk flows like a river, talking out every detail of the mission. These are the faces of combat, faces of Americans who have watched their comrades die, faces that can never forget the enemy, and they're in no mood to have their picture taken. "29 planes back so far. 29 out of 36. Our losses were heavy, but the enemy's were far heavier. We destroyed a German aircraft factory, a rail junction, submarine pens, docks, and harbor installations. That's specific, known damage. But who can tell the number of German torpedoes that will not be fired, the number of our convoys that will get through now, the soldiers' and seamen's lives that will be saved, or the battles that will be won instead of lost because of what these bombers and airmen did today. Pilot and tail gunner. They can laugh now. Fire on the inboard engine did this. Flames streaked back and burned the stabilizer, too. Another crew luck brought back. In the control tower, Colonel Ray, the group CO, is still watching and waiting. And then he spots the last flight. 3 more planes. And one of them is the ship everyone has been pulling for.
The Memphis Belle. The last few miles of this trip have been a joyride. The strain is over. They can leave their guns now. Now they know they're going to go home. To Spokane, Green Bay, Asheville, Detroit, Chicago, Fort Worth, and Yonkers. The Belle comes in for her landing. But first Morgan buzzes the field, cuts the grass with the giant fortress. It's against the rules, but this is a special occasion. The Memphis Belle come back to the soil of England for the 25th time. This is a day they will never forget. Another great day soon after, Brigadier General Hansel visited the field and presented the Distinguished Flying Cross to every member of the crew. And then there was another day. Their Majesties, the King and Queen of England. Johnny Quinlan never thought anything like this would happen to him when he left Yonkers. The ground crew were a little self-conscious about being dressed in fatigues, but the Queen thought they were very nice. Finally, two more visitors came. General Acre, commanding the 8th Air Force, and General Devers, U.S. commander of the European Theater. The Belle crew received them in flying clothes, as General Acre read the order for what he called their 26th and most important mission. Return to America to train new crews and to tell the people what we're doing here. To thank them for their help and support and tell them to keep it up so we can keep it up. So we can bomb the enemy again and again and again until he has had enough. And then we can all come home. Men of the 8th Air Force, who are now flying deep into Germany, bringing destruction to targets almost 1,000 miles from their bases. Destruction like this. And who have never once been turned back by the enemy. To those men, this film is gratefully dedicated.